You're listening to the Dino Bidala Show, SiriusXM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dino Bidala Show. We're live right here, Monday, November 25th. So right now we're shifting gears. A topic that came up last week, and because impeachment ate up everything for 2 weeks, we didn't get to cover it, which was Donald Trump pardoning 3 members of the military. And right now joining me, Jeremy Butler, Chief Executive Officer of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, not-for-profit veterans organization. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval War College. He was a commander in Navy Reserves with nearly 20 years of uniformed service. Jeremy, nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's good to meet you. I appreciate having me on the show.
Sure. So before we get into this substantive issue, tell us people a little bit about the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and what you do.
Absolutely. So we're a post-9/11 veterans organization founded in 2004. But really what's happened sort of since that time is even though we were founded sort of on the basis and the idea of unique needs for the post-9/11 generation, the younger generation of veterans and things that were happening in Iraq and Afghanistan and what their needs were. But what we found over time and over the 15 years that we've been in existence is really the support we provide primarily through advocacy work that we do in Washington, D.C. benefits veterans of all eras, all generations. There's just so many needs that our veteran community has, be you a World War II veteran or you be someone that just came out of active duty a year ago. There's needs from financial needs, medical needs, GI Bill, accessing the VA, a whole crop of women veterans now that are making up the largest part of our veteran and military community that have needs that are not being met. They're not recognized as veterans nearly as broadly as male veterans are. So there's just so many needs, and we're focused on all those. We're working hard to make sure veterans get the care they need.
So if someone is after service now, they've served in Afghanistan or Iraq, they would come to you to try to better understand what the benefits they can get, or you would advocate more on policy change?
Sort of all the above. And really, it doesn't matter where or when you've served. So the name, despite being the name Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, it really is just focused on our country's veterans, with an emphasis to a certain extent on the post-9/11 generation of veterans. But yeah, come to IAVA.org. You can sign up, free membership, open to anyone, veteran, civilian, whoever. And at the minimum, what we're going to do is we're going to keep you informed about what's going on, about policies that we're fighting for and supporting in Washington, D.C. that are going to better our veteran community. Completely nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever word you want to use.
Probably nonpartisan's better because, I mean, bipartisan seems like there's still partisan involved.
Exactly.
Like we're partisan on both sides. No, we're not partisan at all. So from a nonpartisan point of view, I want to get your reaction to Donald Trump, who has now pardoned 3 people, one accused of war crimes, one convicted, and the other sort of a pardon with Eddie Gallagher. Most people know about Eddie Gallagher. But first one is Clint Lawrence. He's a former Army lieutenant who is serving 19 years for the murder of 2 civilians. He was the reporting is that he was a rookie Army lieutenant, been in command of a platoon in Afghanistan in July 2012 when he ordered his troops to fire on unarmed villagers who posed no threat, killing 2 men. He then called in a false report over the radio to cover it up, and he was turned in by his own men who said this was horrible what he had done. So this wasn't some bureaucratic cover-up. This was a guy who his own men said what you did was wrong. First of all, is that the way it should be, that people in a command, a platoon, whatever, if they see something wrong, are they charged in the military with the idea of you should report this, you have to, there's no cover-ups allowed?
Absolutely. That's, I think at a minimum that's what every leader in the military wants to instill upon the men and women who are serving under them, that you never have to obey an unlawful order. It's right there in the oath that we take every year when you're up for reenlistment and things like that. And so that's what we hope, is that is instilled in us at basic training, at whatever level you've gone to when you go back for various schools, that we are a professional military service that serves honorably, and that includes in the heat of battle and in peacetime. And so we would hope that folks would come forward and point out when there are compatriots that aren't behaving correctly.
So Lawrence was convicted of second-degree murder by a court in 2013. He's been serving in Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. So Trump pardons him. Like, it almost like randomly picked this guy, but apparently in right-wing media, social media, they've been talking about this guy. I'm not sure what the injustice would be, but if someone's convicted in military court, I'm not sure how much experience you have in that setting, I mean, do they have safeguards for due process and protections so they can make their case and the government has to make their case? It's not some kind of kangaroo court type of scenario.
No, not at all. I mean, the Uniform Code of Military Justice is very broad and detailed, and I think in general, I'm certainly not going to say in every case because there are certain areas in which we as an organization, IAVA, wants to improve the military justice system. But in general, especially in this case, I think it's safe to say that the process worked the way it's supposed to work. I mean, there's a lot of different terms that you hear within the UCMJ process and things like that, but it basically mirrors the way the civilian side works in terms of justice. You have an ability to be represented by a lawyer. You're tried by a jury of your peers. And in the military case, I think it's often more so a true jury of your peers in the sense that they try and find people who have similar service so that if you were a multiple tour combat veteran, there are going to be people on your jury that have had similar experiences so that they understand what you've been through. And so I think this case is probably the most interesting one in that it is hard to understand why the president weighed in on this case. I mean, it seems like he's not bringing up issues of bad things that happened in the court case and things like that. And so it really is kind of hard to understand why this case was singled out.
Today, I didn't read the whole thing of what he said because I try not to listen to him too much, Trump, because I find he makes your brain dumber. He was saying that in the White House, sitting in a press conference, said that he was defending it, saying things were unfair, just kind of open, and that this man had a lot more years left to be a good war killer or war fighter. And that's not a defense. I'm a lawyer. That's not a defense anywhere. Somebody murders someone. Hey, if you let him out, he can do a lot. Not murdering. I'm not going to be a joke, but he could do a lot more in society and work. You gotta pay your debt because our criminal justice system, and I imagine the military justice system, is predicated on deterrence and punishment. So the essence of justice, but deterrence, because if you don't, people just kill people, you don't pay a price. The message you're sending is go kill more people. That deterrence is prosecuted. Any idea why he would have picked this guy?
I'm not sure. I think you may have been alluding to this. I think in certain cases, I
just read that, and the right-wing media sort of like this guy. I don't know why.
Well, and I think that's it. There are some veterans out there that have, I think, the ear of the president and can bring pet issues, if you will, for lack of a better term, directly to him and get him interested in them. And yeah, I mean, that's what part of this case is. We haven't seen any indication of, hey, I've read or I've found facts. You know, I'm speaking as the president here. I've found facts that show that the trial was not held correctly, that there were improprieties. There's been really none of that. And so it is confusing to understand where this is coming from.
In fact, the ousted Navy Secretary, and you serve in the Navy, Richard Spencer, was just on CBS News tonight, so this just came out, saying about Trump, I quote, I don't think he really understands the definition of a war fighter. A war fighter is a profession of arms, and a profession of arms has standards that they have to be held to, and they hold themselves to. So he's really going at Trump now, sort of undermining this story that he went around Esper, the Secretary of Defense's back, but saying he's trying to hold the military to a standard. As someone who's served and someone who works with veterans, why is it important we have set standards in terms of criminal justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all gets back to how we as a nation regard our military. You know, we have an all-volunteer force, and I think if you talk to anyone who has served, is serving, they are all going to agree that we should never have a draft again. And that's because when you do have an all-volunteer force, you have a professional organization made up of men and women who have volunteered to do this. And even if you're really only serving for 4 years, you come in for a 4-year enlistment, it really is your profession. It's not something you're being forced to do. And so we do hold ourselves to a higher standard. And I think that's important not only for the execution of our duties, but so that when we are operating in foreign countries, we can truthfully say that we are there to do the right thing. And we need to be able to hold ourselves to that standard, even in the most difficult times. And, you know, I did serve in the Navy. I'm a surface warfare officer, so I'm not going to say that I have, you know, direct combat experience or anything like that. But that's part of the way the military works, is it doesn't matter what branch, what MOS, military operational specialty you might be in. We all hold ourselves to a professional standard, and that's the way it should be.
In the case of Clint Lawrence, who was convicted, if we're going to say you can slaughter innocent civilians and pay no price, how are we different than ISIS and Al-Qaeda or the Taliban?
Well, and that's the thing. I think it in cases like this, it can put service members, service men and women who are deployed currently in some danger because there's an argument that we no longer hold the moral high ground, that we can say, hey, you can trust us, you can work with us, we are here for good, we are here to defend you, when anyone could turn around and say, well, your president just pardoned this person who was found guilty by your own government of murder. It can make it hard for those who are currently serving and those who are going to serve to maintain the highest levels of morality and safety that they need.
And I'm chatting with Jeremy Butler, the CEO of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. So the second case is interesting that Trump essentially made himself the judge and the juror because his man's trial didn't even happen. Like, he didn't even allow the trial to take place, then to make a decision. This man is Major Matthew Goldstein, Golsteyn, so Goldstein, I'm not sure, Armed Special Forces officer who was facing murder charges for killing an unarmed Afghan he believed was a Taliban bomb maker. And what's kind of odd about this story is he wasn't charged when it happened. He admitted in a CIA interview under oath that, not under oath, during a polygraph, that he killed this guy who was not, I guess, a threat or something at the time. And then he went on Fox News and said the same type of thing. And now he's charged with premeditated murder. And what is the message sent when Trump, as president, says, I won't even have a trial. I'm going to just deem this guy like a king. You can go because I like you, because Pete Hegseth, the guy on Fox News and Friends, says nice things about you. I mean, this is what we're getting to as policymaking.
Right. Yeah, I think it can undermine, again, going back to the military justice system, because it's saying potentially, or it could be interpreted this way. I don't know what he was trying to say, but it certainly could be interpreted that the commander-in-chief does not trust the military justice system, because it seems to imply that if the case were allowed to go forward, his assumption is that he will be found guilty and that will be a travesty of justice, and so he's just going to preempt the whole thing and pardon him. And so this one is unique in its own way, certainly, not only the story behind it, but the fact that the president did intervene before the case even fully went to trial. So again, it's unique and strange in its own way, I think, and troubling in its own way.
It's unique and strange and troubling in a democracy. It's not in a monarchy or something where you have a king. Because today, to that very point, there was a court decision just before you came on with Donald Trump's former White House counsel, Don McGahn, and the judge rejected the Trump claim that he can absolutely bar anyone not to testify who has ever worked for him or is working for him. And the judge had a great line, stated simply, the primary takeaway from the past 250 years of recorded American history is that the presidents are not kings. And reading that there and listening to what we're talking about here, I can't help but see the intersection between, there's a commonality in both with Don McGahn or wherever he wants to block, and with this is that Trump, I can't get into his mind, but he's acting like someone who views that he's above the law, that he's a sovereign. In fact, the judge went on to say, this means they do not have subjects bound by loyalty or blood whose destiny they are entitled to control. And that is stunning words for a federal judge to put in writing tonight and to read that. And it's something me and many fellow progressives and even moderates believe what's going on. So the last case was someone that got a lot more press, was Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher, a Navy SEAL chief, who was ultimately not convicted of the most serious offenses in his trial. But Trump made a big deal of it during the trial, which I'm not sure if affected the jury or not. I'm hoping not. But he was found guilty of the idea of, I guess, mocking the corpse of someone who was killed. Was the exact charge. Bringing discredit on the armed forces by posing for a photo with the corpse of the captive he was accused of killing. And that he was demoted a little bit. Now Trump is reversing the demotion. What message is that? I know it's part and parcel the same. What message, though, is this send?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of points here. And one, going back to what you were initially just saying about the civilian court judge. One thing that's interesting is that the president, as commander-in-chief, does have the authority to do all of these things. And whether or not you feel that his actions were right or wrong in these cases, it is worth noting that is a unique and interesting part also about our military system, that as president, you are commander-in-chief, and in theory, that is a good thing to ensure civilian control over the military. However, these are very unique cases in which the president, the commander-in-chief, is using his authority as commander-in-chief to really get way more into the weeds than I think we generally find. And this last case of Chief Gallagher, I think, is really a good example of that, in that, and again, it was a case that seems to have been brought to him by veterans that seem to have his ear. And you were right. You were talking about the fact that how he was commenting on the case while it was happening, which in general is something that not only the commander-in-chief but other senior military officials have often got in trouble for, and I'm using air quotes there, in the sense that it can be seen as command influence on the outcome of a trial.
Right.
As someone who is in command, you are generally counseled by your JAG, your Judge Advocate General, to not talk about the case. You shouldn't be making any comments, anything about it, because the jury is going to be, and jury in the quotation marks here, in the sense that under the UCMJ, it's other military members, but they are often going to be junior to that senior person that is talking. And so if he or she hears that senior person giving an opinion about the case, that could certainly affect how he or she might find. So that probably in and of itself is something. However, in this case, we did have improprieties that took place during the case. Right. So arguably, it was legally correct that he was found not guilty. I'm forgetting now if it was that he was found not guilty.
He was found guilty of the murder, but he was found guilty of one minor count, bringing discredit on the armed forces.
Yep. And in that case, it's interesting. I mean, so what the thing that he was, and this is maybe good notation for your listeners, is that what he was found guilty of is not just himself, but his entire platoon took a picture of themselves with the dead body of an Iraqi, I believe, 17-year-old, spread out in front of him as if he was a trophy. And so that was what he was found guilty of. The rest of his platoon was not brought up on charges of it. That's a separate discussion. But that is clear cut. That is wrong. Right. There is no justification for that. He was found guilty of that, but also, again, in this case, was pardoned for it. And so that one, even if you strip away all the other parts of this case, which are just crazy to begin with, once you get into the fact that there was a witness that came forward and ultimately, because he had an immunity, took the blame for the whole thing and said, actually, no, I killed this person, not Chief Gallagher.
Right.
That's a whole separate thing.
Right. We didn't even talk about the facts of that case, and that was a crazy part of it. And if people are wondering, so how many times have presidents in modern day pardoned military people convicted of crimes like this? According to the reporting, Trump is the first one to do this, and he did it in May with another person, Michael Bahena, a former Army lieutenant who'd been convicted of killing a prisoner in Iraq. And look, I don't want to boil this down to the most base thing, but with Trump, I can't help it. That these are white military people who've killed brown people, and Trump is pardoning them. And I have to be blunt. I cannot see a scenario where if it was black or brown military people who had unjustifiably killed white people, that Trump would pardon them. And you don't even have to engage in that, because you have an organization that's nonpartisan. I'm telling you, my gut feeling is that who Donald Trump is, the person I've seen, that is part of this, that there's politics plays in a role in everything. He is running for re-election right now, so I don't think it's hard-pressed to find where's the political angle. And to me, that's where it is. There's also a corruption angle, a slight one at least. The attorneys for the Navy SEAL, Eddie Gallagher, worked for the Trump administration. There was a lawyer who worked for them, Mark McKasey. And then Bernie Kerik, who is the former NYPD commissioner here, was a consultant on the case, and he was close with Rudy Giuliani. He was a business associate with Rudy Giuliani. So the message there, a whole different level of corruption, is hire the attorneys connected to Trump, and you'll get off with your crimes. And that is so Trump. I mean, that is Trump at its essence, the corruption of this guy. But I want to turn to, so I get your sense overall, in the big picture, we've seen many military officers now and former, current ones anonymously, but former ones saying how troubling this is in terms of the chain of command, the sense of what our military stands for. Are you concerned there could be a long-term impact? Do you think this is more transitory? People might dismiss this as this was Trump time and this won't happen again?
Yeah, it's tough to say, because The fact is there are certainly veterans out there, and probably military members as well, that support what the president has done. What I don't know is if that support is based on a feeling that what, in this case, these three men did was actually correct in their minds,
Right.
or is it a sense of, hey, this is a president that's going to stand up for us. We've been fighting these wars for 18 years. We've been, especially in the case of like Chief Gallagher, multiple combat tours. Here's a president that's going to stand up for us because we are the very, very small fraction of this country that is fighting these wars, and we should be allowed some leeway. I don't know what makes them potentially support this, but it is troubling in my mind and to me that there is support around this, because we do have a system that is supposed to work, and it is supposed to allow us to, for the most part, police ourselves, and not say that we shouldn't be held accountable to higher authority as well. But the military justice system is designed to give military commanders the ability to discipline and maintain good order and discipline. I just used discipline twice in that sentence.
No, but it's fine. It's fine. It's everything that Trump isn't. So discipline's important. We got only a couple minutes left here. Tell us a little bit, highlight a few, and I know you have it laid out on the website. We can give the address, the key issues in the 2020 election for veterans that you've heard from them and you're conveying to candidates.
Yeah, the biggest one, if we were talking to candidates, I'd say, hey, you need to be talking about veteran issues and military issues far more often. We just don't talk about it nearly enough.
True.
Except in cases like this. And that's part of the problem, is that this is what America hears about far more about their military and their veterans than anything else. We're not hearing about all the great things that they're doing. We're not hearing about the needs that they have in the community, and that's what we're focused on. So one of the top ones that I would tell anyone running for office or anyone looking to try and help veterans is that we have a military and veteran suicide crisis in this country that is not being met. A lot of people have heard the 20 a day. It used to be 22 a day. The new statistics that are coming out say it's probably 21 a day. The bottom line is we are not fixing the problem of military and veteran suicide, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. There's legislation that we support that can begin to chip away at this problem, but it's a long-term problem, and really it's a national problem. It's not just within the military and veteran community. We have a suicide crisis within this country that we need to be focused on.
I agree. We went to the VA here in Manhattan about a month ago and did a special and met with various doctors, and one was the one that deals with PTSD and suicide rates and how it is a crisis in America that we don't talk about. But veterans, obviously, they're part of our society, so it's slightly more acute with veterans. And last minute, any other what about VA reform? I mean, how is the VA? I know they say you've seen one VA, the O-line, but how is it going overall for people?
Well, there's a lot. The VA does a lot, and it's responsible for an incredible amount. It's the second largest agency within the federal government. So there's a lot that they're getting right, but we do see ourselves as a VA watchdog, and so we're always going to push them to be better, and there are some areas in which they need to be better. Burn pits is one. Burn pits and toxic exposures. Burn pits are these big open-air pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, other countries in Africa that we're deployed in, where service members just dump all their trash, plastics, medical waste. It can be anything. You throw jet fuel on it, you light it on fire, and in some of these large bases, they just burn in 24/7. People can be downwind of them in their housing and just breathe in these toxic fumes for months and months, and they're coming home and they're getting sick and they're dying from these strange cancers. That's a fact. But the VA is not acknowledging it. The VA is not providing medical care for them. So that's one of the areas in which we're pushing the VA to be more accountable, and the Department of Defense, frankly, because it's the Department of Defense that are operating these things. So the two of them need to be working together to take care of veterans. We mentioned women veterans. There's a lot more that the VA needs to be doing to take care of women veterans. We're talking cannabis, bring cannabis as a potential treatment effort to veterans.
So what's the website, last thing here, again, if people want to find out more about your organization?
Yeah, please go to IAVA.org, IAVA.org. It's anyone can sign up, become a member. We'll keep you informed about what's going on, and we'll tell you how to contact your members of Congress to push them to support the legislation that we have worked with them to develop that are going to bring some fixes to all of this. Thanks,
Jeremy Butler, CEO of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Thanks for your time and your insight. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Be right back, folks.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back to the Dino Dollar Show. That was Jeremy Butler. Go check out IAVA if you're interested. Great organization. When we come back, Rick Unger is going to join us, our friend, to cover a lot of stuff in politics right after this quick break on the Dino Dollar Show.